He thought her silence meant absence, but silence is not emptiness. Silence can be a throne, and she is seated upon it. Every man who has wandered too close to the Queen archetype learns this truth the hard way. Words can beg, plead, justify, but silence exposes. It strips away illusions and forces him to hear the echoes of his own hunger. Have you noticed how the more he tries to fill the quiet, the more he reveals his weakness? A queen's silence is not avoidance. It is presence sharpened to its purest edge. It is the refusal to explain, to shrink, to barter with her dignity. In a world that conditions women to soften every edge and to smooth over every discomfort, the woman who chooses silence bends reality itself. He expects reassurance, but she offers none. He expects justification, but she remains still. That stillness grows heavy on his chest until he mistakes it for obsession, when in truth it is his own desperation amplified. The Queen archetype ignites this storm not through performance but through restraint. A glance withheld is more magnetic than a flood of words. An unanswered message burns hotter than 1,000 explanations. Men are trained to believe they hold the power by pursuing, conquering, deciding. Yet the Queen subverts this unspoken law by stepping back, not forward. She does not chase, and in that refusal she becomes the one he cannot stop chasing. Imagine the effect of no longer rehearsing your reasons, no longer decorating your no with apologies. Silence allows the truth to rise to the surface unfiltered. The man who was so sure of his place in her world begins to question himself. He wonders what he did wrong, why he no longer feels her approval, whether he has lost something irreplaceable. That is the seed of obsession, not desire freely given, but desire awakened in absence. The Queen's silence does not punish, it transforms. It is the crucible in which his illusions dissolve. When a woman stays quiet, she forces him to confront the reality of his own dependence on her validation. This is not cruelty, it is clarity. Without her laughter softening his pride, without her words cushioning his failures, he must finally face himself. And what terrifies him most is the possibility that she does not need him at all. Many men confuse dominance with noise, loud opinions, constant directives, endless attempts to assert control. But silence disarms more effectively than confrontation. It is difficult to fight an opponent who refuses to engage. The Queen archetype embodies this paradox. She wields stillness as her weapon, and the battlefield becomes his own mind. The more he attempts to pull her back into the old dynamic, the more her quiet detachment draws him deeper into obsession. There is a girl who grew up believing she must always smile, always smooth over conflict, always rescue fragile egos. But silence taught her another way. At a dinner table, surrounded by conversation, she once chose to hold her tongue instead of laughing at a joke that belittled her. That small act unsettled the room more than any speech could have. For the first time, she felt the power of presence unadorned. That moment was the seed of the Queen archetype awakening within her. Silence also separates signal from noise. When she no longer explains, the man who truly sees her will not demand justification. He will listen more closely, adjust his steps, grow into strength. The one who cannot tolerate silence will lash out, blame, or crumble. Either way, her quiet creates revelation, and revelation always carries consequences. Some men will vanish, unable to withstand the weight of her sovereignty. Others will become consumed, circling her throne with increasing desperation. Both outcomes reveal the truth of who they are. Have you noticed how silence reveals more about others than words ever could? When you do not rush to fill the gap, you begin to see how people scramble. Some offer respect. Others reveal their entitlement. That difference is everything. It shows who is capable of walking beside a queen and who only wished for a servant disguised as a lover. The Queen's silence is not withdrawal but choice. It is rooted in self-respect so deep it cannot be negotiated. This is why it drives men to obsession, because they cannot purchase it with charm, cannot manipulate it with guilt, cannot force it with anger. It stands untouched, a mirror that reflects their own longing back at them. He begins to obsess not with her body, not even with her words, but with the enigma of her silence. The unyielding mystery becomes his torment and his desire. Tonight, try one moment of silence where you would normally rush to explain. Resist the urge to soften your truth. Watch what happens when the space remains unfilled. You may find that silence is not weakness but sovereignty, a language older than words, a crown invisible yet undeniable. But silence has many faces, and not all are equal. Some silence nurtures, some tests, and some consumes. Which one ignites his obsession most powerfully, and how does the queen decide when to wield it? There is silence that soothes, like the hush of a sanctuary where no demand can enter. There is silence that tests, like the space between thunder and lightning where anticipation grows unbearable. And there is silence that consumes, a void so commanding it forces him to chase meaning inside the emptiness. The Queen archetype does not wield silence randomly. She understands its shades, its textures, its timing. That is why it ignites not just desire but obsession. The first face of her silence is the refusal to reassure. Most men have been trained to expect a woman's comfort when they stumble, her softness when they feel exposed. The queen withholds this reflex. She does not patch over his mistakes with nervous laughter. She does not reassure him when he falters. Instead, she watches. That watching unsettles him more than anger could. In the mirror of her quiet eyes, he sees himself without disguise, and once seen, he cannot escape the image. The second face is the silence of boundaries. She does not beg him to respect her. She simply removes herself from the noise of disrespect. The man who jokes at her expense, who tests her patience with games, finds himself speaking into a void. There is no reaction, no laughter, no wounded defense, only stillness. That absence gnaws at him more painfully than confrontation. He wonders why his tricks no longer land. He senses a throne he cannot touch. And the more he senses it, the more he circles it, drawn to the gravity of her untouchable space. The third face is silence as invitation. It is the quiet that compels him to step forward to prove his worth. She does not explain what she deserves. She allows him to reveal himself by what he chooses to give. Some men will rise, becoming more deliberate, more attentive, more truthful. Others will crumble, exposed by the hollowness of their performance. Either way, her silence acts as a filter, drawing out authenticity while discarding pretense. This magnetic silence is not passive. It is not the silence of submission, but of command. It rearranges the dynamics of power without a single word. He begins to measure himself by her silence. When she does not respond, he questions his value. When she does not react, he questions his strength. Every unanswered moment becomes a riddle, and riddles demand solving. But the Queen archetype never hands over the solution. He must either rise to meet the silence or be consumed by it. Consider how different this is from the endless explanations many women are taught to give. How often are you told to soften a no, to smile when declining, to cushion the truth with apology? But silence breaks that cycle. It is a refusal to dress the truth in costumes. It is the clean edge of sovereignty, and men feel the cut of that edge even when they do not understand why. In myth, queens rarely shout to prove their authority. Their presence alone commands allegiance. A throne does not chase its subjects. Subjects orient themselves around the throne. So it is with the Queen archetype. Her silence is the throne itself, immovable, undeniable, radiant in its stillness. He feels the gravitational pull not because she begs for his attention, but because she does not. What happens inside a man when faced with such silence? At first, restlessness. He repeats old strategies, jokes, compliments, pressure, waiting for a familiar reaction. When nothing comes, anxiety grows, then comes the chase. He replays her last words in his mind, searching for clues. He checks his phone, hoping for a message. He dreams of her face, but the silence grows louder than any memory. Finally, obsession takes root. The absence becomes a presence in itself, one he cannot escape. This is why silence, when wielded by the Queen archetype, is never emptiness. It is abundance withheld. It is presence magnified. It is the paradox that fuels his fixation. The less she gives, the more he desires. The quieter she becomes, the louder his thoughts echo. And in that spiral, he is no longer in control. The hunter becomes hunted by his own mind. But there is a danger hidden here as well. Silence is powerful, yet power without discernment can destroy. The Queen does not use silence to manipulate. She uses it to reveal. If her silence comes from bitterness, it curdles into poison. If it comes from fear, it loses its edge. Only when silence is rooted in sovereignty, calm, self-assured, unwavering, does it become magnetic. Only then does it elevate her above noise and draw him into obsession that transforms rather than corrodes. Tonight, try to hold one boundary in silence. When tempted to explain, resist. When urged to justify, decline with stillness. Let your quiet presence speak. You may find that silence draws out more truth than words ever could. You may notice who grows restless, who grows respectful, and who reveals their dependence on your compliance. But obsession is not sustained by silence alone. It is ignited there, yes, but then it deepens through mystery, distance, and the aura of the untouchable. What is it about the Queen archetype that makes her silence linger like perfume in the air, long after she has left the room? Obsession is rarely born from abundance. It thrives in the space between what is given and what is withheld. The Queen archetype understands this paradox instinctively. She does not flood him with access, nor does she starve him completely. She creates distance, a measured rhythm of presence and absence until he feels her energy even when she is gone. That distance is not rejection, it is sovereignty made visible. A man accustomed to immediate gratification cannot comprehend this rhythm at first. He has known women who rush to answer his messages, who bend their schedules to match his, who mistake availability for love. But the Queen does not collapse her world to fit his. Her silence is partnered with distance, and that distance reminds him that he is not the center of her universe. He begins to wonder what claims her attention, what kingdom occupies her time. His imagination burns to fill in the gaps, and obsession sharpens in the absence of certainty. This is the second way her magnetic silence ignites him, through mystery. She resists the compulsion to narrate every thought, to explain every action. She leaves room for the unknown, and that unknown torments him more than any spoken answer could. In a world of oversharing, she is rare. In a culture where every detail of life is broadcast, she holds back, and in that restraint she becomes unforgettable. Mystery is not deception. It is the art of allowing space between questions and answers. When she does not rush to clarify, he must sit with his own projections. When she does not immediately share, he must wrestle with uncertainty. That tension stirs his mind long after she has left the room. He wonders if she is thinking of him. He wonders what she meant by her last glance, her last word. His own imagination becomes the stage where obsession plays out, fueled not by her presence, but by the silence she left behind. Distance intensifies this effect. Imagine the Queen in myth, seated in her castle high above the restless crowd. She is not always seen, yet her influence stretches far beyond the walls. Men travel great lengths just to catch a glimpse, just to hear a word, just to stand in her presence for a moment. The rarity of access breeds reverence. The scarcity of her presence creates value. So too in modern love and desire. When she is not always available, when her attention cannot be purchased or demanded, he must earn it. Every encounter feels heightened, precious, almost sacred. He waits longer between moments, but those moments burn brighter because of the wait. This rhythm reshapes his perception of her. She ceases to be one more voice in the chorus of constant noise, and becomes instead a singular note he cannot stop hearing in his mind. There is a hidden strength in this strategy. It protects her from men who seek only conquest. For such men, distance feels intolerable. They crave easy victory, fast validation. When faced with silence and sovereignty, they withdraw, exposed by their impatience. But for the man capable of depth, the silence pulls him inward. It forces him to grow, to adapt, to rise beyond superficial pursuit. The queen's distance becomes his initiation. Have you ever noticed how quickly some men lose interest once you give them everything they ask for? How quickly their energy fades once certainty is guaranteed? That is because desire cannot thrive in absolute certainty. It needs contrast. It needs the play of presence and absence, the whisper of the unknown. The queen does not play games. She embodies this truth naturally. Her distance is not a tactic but a reflection of her self-possession. She does not collapse into his orbit because she already has a world of her own. And so his obsession deepens not just because of who she is when she appears, but because of who she is when she vanishes. He learns to live in the ache of her absence. He learns to treasure the silence because it points to something larger than himself. He begins to orbit her, even without her asking. Tonight, notice how quickly you feel the urge to explain, to justify, to make yourself endlessly available. What if you resisted that urge? What if, instead of rushing to fill the silence, you allowed it to stretch? What if, instead of collapsing distance, you honored it? You might see how men reveal themselves in the spaces you leave open. You might discover how distance filters out the unworthy, leaving only those strong enough to stay. But distance and mystery are not the final layers of this power. There is yet another form of silence, one that pierces deeper than distance, sharper than mystery. It is the silence that reveals his hunger or validation and denies him the feast. It is the silence that forces him to question his own worth. And once a man begins to question that, obsession becomes inevitable. Validation is a drug most men are never weaned from. From boyhood, they learn to measure themselves by the approval of women, peers, and society. Every achievement, every conquest, every display of strength, beneath it all lies the hunger for someone to confirm, "You are enough." The Queen archetype understands this hunger, but she does not feed it cheaply. Her silence becomes the mirror where he confronts the absence of easy validation. This is the third way her magnetic silence ignites obsession, through restraint. She does not rush to praise every gesture, nor does she scatter compliments like coins. Her acknowledgement is rare, deliberate, and deeply felt when it comes. The rest of the time, silence reigns. That silence unsettles him because it withholds the immediate confirmation he expects. He begins to crave it. He begins to chase it. He begins to bend himself into forms that might finally draw her recognition. It is not cruelty, it is discipline. For the queen does not validate a man to soothe his ego. She validates only what is real, earned, sovereign. Her silence makes her affirmation meaningful, a currency he cannot counterfeit. And because it cannot be demanded, he must pursue it with more than words. He must rise into actions worthy of it. Consider the men who thrive on flattery. They gather women who admire them, friends who echo them, followers who cheer them. But strip away the noise of constant validation, and suddenly their confidence falters. That is why the queen's silence is so destabilizing. She refuses to perform in his theater. She refuses to offer the applause he has always assumed would come. He must perform not for her approval, but for his own becoming. And still, he longs for her eyes to see him. This dynamic carves obsession into his psyche. He begins to wonder what she notices, what she thinks, what she withholds. Every silence feels like a test. Every absence of affirmation feels like a challenge. His mind circles back again and again, hoping for a sign. And when at last a word of recognition slips through, when she finally says yes, I see you that moment lands like thunder. It anchors itself in his memory because of the long silence that came before. But this power requires discernment. Silence, when wielded without intention, can feel like neglect. Silence, when paired with contempt, becomes cruelty. The Queen archetype does not neglect or despise, she chooses. She withholds validation not from malice but from sovereignty. She does not confuse his ego with his essence. She rewards truth, not performance. That difference is what makes her silence magnetic rather than destructive. Have you noticed how easily you may fall into the habit of over-validating? How quickly praise spills out, hoping to keep the peace, hoping to keep him close. And yet, has that abundance of affirmation ever guaranteed devotion? Or has it instead made your words lose their weight? The Queen's silence teaches that your attention is a sacred resource. To spend it on every action, every demand, is to drain it of meaning. To hold it back, to let silence stand, is to let your validation retain its fire. This silence is also an invitation. It invites him to stop seeking surface approval and to seek something deeper, self-respect. He cannot force her recognition, but he can cultivate his own integrity. He can step into his own sovereignty, and in that state, her validation will arrive naturally, not as a prize but as a reflection. Obsession grows in this paradox. The more he chases her praise, the more elusive it becomes. The more he grows into worthiness, the more her silence finally breaks into affirmation. In myth, the Queen's approval was never given lightly. A king might win battles but still yearn for her word. A warrior might bring trophies but still hunger for her glance. Her silence was the measure of their persistence. Only the one who proved not just strength but devotion received the acknowledgement that crowned him. That is why her silence has always been dangerous, because it separates pretenders from the worthy. Tonight, reflect on where you scatter your validation too freely, to men who have not earned it, to actions that do not reflect truth. What would shift if you allowed silence instead? What if you chose to validate not out of habit, but out of sovereignty? You might see how quickly the balance of power returns to you. You might feel the gravity that silence creates when paired with discernment. But restraint is only one layer of her silence. There remains another, more piercing form, the silence that refuses to argue, refuses to defend, refuses to shrink. The silence that holds her ground so firmly that he must confront his own shadows without her guidance. That silence does not only ignite obsession, it transforms the battleground of relationship itself. Arguments are where most women lose their power. They try to explain, to justify, to prove their point until their words collapse under exhaustion. Yet the Queen archetype knows that silence can be sharper than any rebuttal. When a man pushes, provokes, or demands, she does not fall into the trap of endless explanation. Her silence becomes her shield, her sword, and her throne all at once. This is the fourth way her magnetic silence ignites obsession, through refusal to defend. The moment she stops arguing, she shifts the entire dynamic. He expects combat. He expects escalation. He expects her to prove her worth through words. When none come, he is left facing only himself. The noise he created echoes back at him, unanswered. That void unsettles him more than any counterargument ever could. Silence in this form is not passivity. It is not weakness. It is the quiet of a mountain unmoved by storms. It is the power of presence without entanglement. When he shouts, she does not answer. When he provokes, she does not react. Her silence declares, "I do not need to prove what I already know." That declaration is not spoken, yet it resounds louder than any argument. This silence forces him into confrontation with his own conscience. Without her words to battle, he is left wrestling with the weight of his own. Every accusation, every insult, every attempt to destabilize her collapses under its own hollowness. He begins to hear himself more clearly. He begins to feel the emptiness of his tactics, and within that emptiness, obsession brews. Because her silence refuses to be broken, he obsesses over how to reach her. He obsesses over what she is thinking. He obsesses over the mystery her refusal creates. Have you ever noticed how easily words are wasted in conflict? You speak, he twists. You explain, he dismisses. You defend, he denies. And round it spins, draining you of strength. Yet what if silence ended the spiral? What if the refusal to engage dismantled the game itself? This is the Queen's weapon. She does not silence herself from fear. She silences herself from sovereignty. Men are trained to draw power from women's emotional reactions. Anger, tears, pleading, all of it confirms their impact. But silence starves that power. Silence strips the conflict of its fuel. And in that emptiness, he begins to unravel. He expected a war, but she never enlisted. He expected fire, but she remained the stone. And so, obsession creeps in, not for her approval this time, but for her reaction. He longs to break the silence to earn even a flicker of response. This form of silence is also a mirror. It reflects back his behavior without commentary. It says, "Look at yourself." And often, the longer she holds her silence, the clearer that reflection becomes. Men who rely on chaos to maintain control cannot withstand the weight of their own reflection. They fold, or they transform. But either way, it is her silence that dictates the outcome. Yet silence in conflict does not mean absence of boundaries. The Queen archetype speaks when needed. She does not abandon truth. She chooses its timing. Her silence is the pause that denies escalation, not the absence of strength. And when she finally does speak, her words carry the force of 1,000 withheld sentences. That contrast is what makes them unforgettable. Imagine a moment where he unleashes his storm. You listen, but you do not answer. Your eyes remain steady. Your lips remain closed. You do not retreat and you do not strike back. Minutes pass. The storm rages, then wanes, then fades into confusion. In that silence, the balance shifts. He feels the weight of your refusal to participate. He feels the futility of his noise. And in the quiet aftermath, he finds himself strangely drawn toward you, desperate to regain your voice. That desperation is obsession. But this silence is not easy. It demands courage. It demands the discipline to resist explaining yourself. It demands the sovereignty to remain calm in the fire. Many cannot hold it because silence feels like surrender. Yet, in truth, silence is the strongest form of resistance, for in silence you deny him the battlefield. In silence you remain unbroken. This fourth layer of silence carries a challenge. Tonight, when conflict arises, resist the impulse to explain. Instead, hold your ground in silence. Let your presence be the answer. Let him face himself without your words to cushion the blow. Notice how the energy shifts. Notice how his fire struggles to survive without fuel. That silence will speak louder than any defense ever could. But there is still one silence left, the most dangerous, the most magnetic, the one that transforms obsession into reverence. It is the silence not of withholding, not of restraint, not of refusal, but of sacred stillness. The silence that radiates mystery, depth, and sovereignty so complete that he cannot look away. That silence does not merely unsettle him, it enthrones her. The fifth and final way the Queen archetype ignites obsession through silence is sacred stillness. This is not the silence of resistance, nor the silence of boundaries. It is the silence of presence so radiant, so complete, that words become unnecessary. It is the silence of a woman who has nothing to prove, nothing to chase, nothing to explain, because she already is. This silence does not create void, it creates fullness. It is the stillness of a temple, the hush of a cathedral where every sound echoes eternity. When she enters a room, her stillness commands more attention than another's noise ever could. She does not need to fight for space, she becomes the space. And in that space, a man feels small, drawn, enchanted, unsettled. He cannot look away. Why does this silence captivate? Because it feels ungraspable. Men are conditioned to chase what they cannot claim. And what is more unclaimable than a woman who belongs to herself completely? She does not orbit him. She does not bend herself to fit his moods. She does not rush to fill empty air with nervous chatter. She allows silence to exist between them, and that silence becomes magnetic. Sacred stillness is not withdrawal, it is depth. It is the difference between a shallow stream and an endless ocean. He senses that her silence is not emptiness but mystery, and mystery is the most intoxicating force. Mystery ignites curiosity, and curiosity fuels obsession. He begins to wonder, what is she thinking? What secrets does she carry? What has shaped her silence into something so powerful? In this stillness, she is untouchable. He may try to provoke, but she does not stir. He may try to impress, but she does not chase. He may try to control, but she does not bend. Her silence tells him, "You may enter my world, but you will never own it." And that truth both terrifies and enthralls him. Have you ever felt the tension of silence in the presence of someone unshakable? Not awkward silence, not anxious silence, but the kind of silence that feels holy, as if speaking too quickly would desecrate the moment. That is the silence of the queen. It does not beg, it does not collapse, it waits, and in its waiting it reigns. Sacred stillness is also profoundly feminine. Where masculine energy often seeks to penetrate, to act, to speak, feminine energy rules by being. In her silence, she embodies timeless sovereignty. She becomes less a woman in his eyes and more an archetype, queen, oracle, goddess. An obsession takes hold because he cannot simply possess her, he must worship her. Yet this silence also tests him. Can he withstand it without trying to break it? Can he sit in her presence without scrambling to fill the air? Can he meet her in depth instead of dragging her into surface noise? Few men can. Many will try and fail. But the few who can endure her stillness are the ones who rise. They are the ones who transform from boys into kings. This is why sacred silence ignites not just obsession but reverence. At first, he may feel unsettled. Then he becomes curious. Then desperate, and finally, if he is capable, he becomes devoted. Her silence has stripped him of illusions, of noise, of power games. It has drawn him into a world where words are too small, where only presence matters. And in that world, she rules. This silence also carries liberation for her. For years, perhaps she filled spaces with words, with laughter, with explanations, with apologies. But now, she learns that silence can be a crown. She learns that stillness is not absence but majesty. She learns that she does not need to perform to be worthy of attention. Her silence itself is the performance, and the world cannot look away. So here is the final challenge. Tonight, sit in silence with yourself. No music, no phone, no words, just silence. Let it feel uncomfortable. Let it feel strange. Then notice how slowly the silence becomes less empty and more alive. Notice how your breath deepens, how your presence thickens, how your body begins to feel like a throne. That is sacred stillness. When you carry that stillness into the world, men will feel it. They will not be able to name it, but they will not be able to resist it either. And this is the grand reward. Obsession may have drawn him, but reverence will keep him. Silence, once feared, becomes sovereign, and the Queen Archetype shows us that words can charm, but silence enthrones. In the end, it is not what she says that makes her unforgettable. It is what she does not say. So the question remains, will you keep filling the air with explanations, or will you dare to rule with silence?